Hello, everyone, and welcome back to Streaming Alchemy. I'm John Mahoney, and on today's show, we're going to take a look at how you can manage remote guests, remote callers between a green room and being live on air. And so this is basically a scripting exercise that uses multiple layered inputs to handle this. But before we get into that, let me first invite everybody, if you have any questions, any comments, we'd love to get to them right here on the show. So feel free to just post them below and we'll do what we can to answer them here. Also, if you'd like to join us live on air, we do have a link for that. So if you go to the link, it's also in the show notes. You can just have somebody from the studio get you sorted out and you're on air with us. Okay, so let me give you a little background for what we want to cover today. So some of you might remember a service called BlaB, and it was actually very popular because what it provided was a way for a host to just have a rotating set of guests that they could start a discussion with and then bring new people into that discussion over the course of the discussion to service different perspectives or to actually, just keep the conversation moving forward. So when I started to think of this, I was actually doing this for another purpose, but when I started to think of how to put this technology together, that seemed like a great model to use as a sort of a workflow design. So let me show you what we put together for today's show, and then we can get into how we actually did it. So if you look here, what I have is two inputs I'm showing here on the screen. So in the one corner, just sort of pointing down below here, so down here, in one corner, I have a green room, and that's showing sort of the video of the host of this discussion, and it shows 6 potential panelist guest discussion participants. And what we have in the lower right is sort of 4 hot seats that any of these guests can be assigned to. And we did scripting to allow this Stream Deck up here to let me select a guest, select which one of the hot seats I wanted to bring them into, and then to swap them into that seat. So let me just show you. I could turn around and say, I want to have guest 5 show up in slot 1. And then when I say swap, what you see is the 5th guest just moved out of the green room and into sort of one of these 4 hot seats. And I can do that with any number. So I can have guest 2 go into slot 2 and make that happen. I can have guest 5 go into slot 3, and we'll take guest 1 go into slot 4. And so I now, as you can see, every time I move a guest into one of the live slots, they are pulled out of this green room space. And if I want to replace one of these guests, so say I wanted to put guest 4 up here and say I want to replace the person in slot 3. And then I go swap. You'll now see that it moved the person that was in that slot back to the green room, and the person that was there in the green room is now occupying that slot. We can also, if we wanted to select any one of the slots, so say we wanted to drop the person in slot 1, I can select slot 1, click slot off, and that will push that person back to the green room and open up another chair for somebody else to join. And you can always just go and click all off, which will move everybody back to the green room. So that is what we are actually doing on today's show. We're going to go over the scripting for how all of that will work. So I think we just have one person here that has checked in with us. So if we want to switch over there. So we have Bill from Royal Tunbridge. Bill Mew. Bill, thank you for joining us. Always great to see you here. So if we want to get into here, let's first start with how we set up our vMix session, our vMix preset. And we can go through, it's pretty straightforward, but we'll just go through what we have set up here. So as you saw from what we did sort of in this preview of how this will all work, we we have 6 guests that are coming in, and they start, at slot 1, and the next 6 sequential, and the next 5 from slot 1. So 1 through 6 are all the potential guests we have coming in. I then have a input for a live panel. So these are the 4 open seats. And right now, these are just set up as layers. So layer 1 to 4. And we have this input over here, this open seat image is what's assigned to each of those first 4 layers. And I manipulate that in the script as we add people to the live and take them out. The next input over here we have is the green room. And that's very similar. It just has an input here. So let me sort of click over here so we can see this a little bigger. We have this input here, which is our live input. And so that's what everybody in the green room will be seeing and listening to as they wait to get their turn to take an active seat. And we have the 6 guests. So this is set up in a very generic way. So it could be used with live to air. It could be used with vMix call, any sort of arrangement that you want. And we've made the scripting basically so that you can plug in any details that you wanted to plug in around the particular remote guest mechanism you're using. And so again, these are just layers. So everything is set up where we have 6 layers for each of the guests, as well as an additional layer for the return video coming from the studio. So this is how we have the vMix set up. So the next thing we'll do is we will just dive into our script for how all of this will work. But before we do that, we just have a few more. So Bill is asking, can you also switch from a 4-box to a 3-box or a 2-box? So the way we set up the system is that we just have a 4-box. You could easily make this so it could say, I want to take a 3-box or a 2-box. And it's just, you sort of map those differently. And I just would need to do more work because I'd need to keep all of those different inputs, my 4, 3, and 2-box inputs, all synchronized. Right now, I'm just working with the 1 4-box, but it extends very easily. And as we get into the script, I'll make sure I point out how that would work differently. So we also have Aniles and Jan. So I apologize if I am mispronouncing your name, but thank you very much for joining us from Belgium. I appreciate that. And we also have Tony Moreno. It says, amazing setup, John. Yeah, I mean, hopefully, what we're doing here, you can see different ways to leverage. And, I'll talk more about it in the post-show, sort of where this original effort came from. But yeah, there are lots of different applications for this. So hope you enjoyed the show, Tony. Thank you for joining us. Okay, so what I'm going to do now is let me get up here and we can jump into our code over here. And so everything that we have is running in a single script. The way this script works is very similar to what we've done over the last several shows this season with these sort of background loops that basically have an action and then some argument. And so that's what we're doing in this case as well. We are taking in basically 3 variables. We take in which guest do I have selected, which live Hotseat slot do I have selected, and what action do I want to perform. So those are the 3 sort of arguments. And we are using dynamic variables to do this. There are other ways, but this is the way we're sort of handling this right now. And if we go through here, everything we have at the front, as usual, is just all our setup. We specify the first input for where our guest starts, and we have them sequential. So we know our guests start at input 1, so we go from 1 to 6, and we just leverage that. Our live show input, that's the one with the 4 seats that we have. That's input 7, and our green room input is input 8. And our seat, sort of what we call our blank input, but it's that seat image, that's input 9. So this is really just making it easy so we don't have to go searching for things. We just set these up in the beginning, and that's how we have that set. But now we're into things that are fairly similar to what we've done in the past. We have our action, what do we want to do? Swap guests between the green room, drop a seat, drop everybody. So that's basically the 3 actions we're dealing with. And the other thing we have here is I have something which is an array, an integer array called slot assignment. And what this array lets me do is track when I assign a guest to one of the 4 hot seats, which one of my guests is in that hot seat. Because I have to know when I want to put them back into the green room, who am I moving back into the green room? And what do I need to do? So we just, every time we assign a guest to a hot seat, we put their number in the corresponding slot assignment. And if it's 0, we know that's just an open seat. So that's pretty basic for what we do there. And here is what we have done in the past. We just are using dynamic values. So dynamic value 1 is the slot that we're using. Dynamic value 2 is the guest channel. Which one of the 6 guests do I want to work with? And then dynamic value 3 is our action. And what we do here is we set dynamic value 3, as opposed to initializing to 0 to say there's nothing here, we set it to 2. And what action 2 is, let's clear out everything. So our first step, when we get into our loop, which is the next part of the script, our first step is to say, clear out everything, we're starting fresh, and this will be our initial state for this sort of discussion panel that we're setting up here. So with that, we then go into our main loop. And our main loop is always sort of a while true. So the script will just keep running in the background after that initial setup. And we read the vMix XML. So that lets us basically read all the dynamic values. That's what we're using it for here. So we open up the vMix XML and we pull the dynamic values for 1, 2, and 3 out of that. Now, you remember we set the dynamic value for action, dynamic value 3 to 2, the clear everything out. So our first pass through that's going to be our initial action, and we'll clear it, and then it just goes into a wait state for another specific action. So that's what we're doing here. We pull all those dynamic values in, and then we go into our main selection loop. So as usual, case 0 is don't do anything, let's just wait. And so that just falls out, and at the end of this while loop, it's always going, we have I think 500 millisecond delay, and then we'll loop back and check again. Case 1 is actually the sort of the main driver for the logic here. And that's case 1 means take whatever guest is selected in the guest channel, the selected guest channel, and push them into the open, the slot that we selected. So dynamic value 1 is the slot, dynamic value 2 is the guest. So we pull those in. And then what I need to do now is say, I need to take the guest that's already in that slot and move them back to the green room. And I got to take the guests from the green room, the one that I just specified here, and move them into that slot. So we're doing that sort of transition. So what I do first is I check to make sure, do I have both a selected slot and a selected guest? So that's the first step I have to take. And if not, then I just exit. I say, you haven't set everything up, so we can't handle that. So if we don't have those two, we don't do anything. We just write this out to the console to make sure we know what we're dealing with. And then we're going in and we're starting to do the swapping. Now, the first thing, and this is not a common use case, but we just wanted to make sure we had it. If you have the same guest in 2 different slots out there, I mean, there could be reasons you may do that. We didn't want to sort of make assumptions that was totally forbidden. So all we do here is we just say, if this guest is in another slot, we're not going to move them back to the green room. We're just going to take them out of the one slot that they're in. So logically, if I have people in 2 slots, the same person in 2 different slots, I take them out of one. that person just isn't in that second slot, but they're not back in the green room. They're still in one of the slots. So that's what we test first. And we just set this up to say, I'm looking to see if the guest that we're pulling out is in any of the other slots. Are they in multiple slots? As long as they're just in one slot, then we're good, and we can just pull them out. And that's all we're doing here. We just count how many slots are they in, and then we use that to determine what action we take. So the first thing we do before we take any actions, we say, well, let's take the channel, the 1 to 6 of that guest that's in this slot, and we'll say that's the channel that's exiting. So that's what we did right here. That's the one we're going to pull out. And then I said, if this existing guest isn't in another slot, which means I'm less than 2, this guest is in less than 2, so they're just in one slot, then we turn around and say, okay, so now we're going to turn their audio off, and assuming that it isn't a blank, like if the guest in that current slot is 0, which means it's an open seat, we don't have to do anything. But if it's not an open seat, if it's another guest, then we go in and we set the layer in the green room that they came from back to that guest. So we're basically doing the first step of pulling them out. We're pushing them into the green room. The next thing we do is we are now making the assignment back into the slot of the new guest. So we're coming in here saying, now let's say the guest that is assigned to this slot is the one that I had the selected channel, the selected guest from my 2 dynamic variables. And I turn their audio on. I set the layer in the live slot now. So this is turning around and saying, I'm removing them from the green room. So I'm turning that layer off. And then I'm going and setting that layer in the active slot on. So basically, that's the visual transition you're seeing. Their image goes off in the green room, and we replace that with a open seat, and the image in the 4 active guest slots, that corresponding one, they actually show up in there. So that's just the visual swap, and I turn their audio on. So I'm basically just saying, activate the audio for this guest. And so everything that I've done up here is basically that visual transition. And that's the key piece that we're doing here for doing that swap. So it's, very straightforward, but there's just a few things. And the most complicated thing, to be honest, is just checking if they're in multiple slots. And again, that was just an edge case, but we wanted to cover it in case that was something that would make sense for your productions. So let me actually I have a few more comments, and then we'll jump in and finish up everything we're doing here in the script. So let's see. So Vangelis, thank you for joining us here, and we definitely appreciate you taking the time to watch, and we do hope this is useful to you. So, and we also have maybe it's also interesting. So this is Ellis and John say maybe it's also interesting to trigger the swap of guests to quad screen based on audio inputs of guests in the green room. So yes, there are different things you could do to trigger people coming in and out. And one of the things that I was thinking of when Bill Mew had mentioned, could you do this? I think it was Bill. Yes, if you could do this in like a 3-box or a 2-box, if you wanted to as well, to have multiples, is that if I went to one of those different box layouts, if I could turn around and say, maybe I could use that to trigger moving somebody back into the green room. So that would almost be sort of an automatic thing where I could do that. So there may be different reasons you want to trigger that swap to happen. Audio could be one of them. One of the things, and this is something we're going to do a future show on, but something, if you're using something like Live to Air, we also have the ability for people to sort of do a raise hand or agree or disagree. And that can be used as data as well. So we could write a script that said, if somebody raised their hand, you could actually, if there was an open seat, you could actually assign them to any one of the open seats. And we can keep the order that people raise their hands as well in Live to Air. So that'd be another way to sort of use this interactively, where if you wanted to have that, it would be easy enough to do. So lots of different ways, but I agree. That's a good point that there may be different ways you're going to want to do the trigger. Right now, we did sort of as a very straightforward, specific assignment. Pick a slot, pick a guest, swap them in. So thank you. Okay, Eric. So Eric is actually the person that I was talking with that sort of inspired the idea for what we're doing here. Different use case, but Eric's initial questions for how to do something to me is the thing that sort of inspired this. So Eric, thank you for joining us. So let's see. So Hurday Kumar, he says how to set up instant lyrics. So I'm not exactly sure what you're asking for, Hurday, but if you wanted to do something where you were taking sort of like voice to text and using that, I'm not sure exactly. So if you have something more specific that's related to this, just we'll get to it here during the show. Otherwise, just push this out there, and we'll talk about it in the after show. And that's a sort of a more comfortable time to just talk about more random topics. So thank you, Hudray, for joining us. I appreciate it. Okay, so let's get back to the last two actions that we have in the code here. So we just went through and we did everything with the first case, which is swapping things between a guest in the green room and an open slot, or a slot, whether it's open or has a guest in it, in the live show. So the next case we did is just how do you turn everybody off, which is sort of our initial case. And this is really fairly straightforward. What we're doing is we start out with, say, our selected slot, now selected channel about 0. So we're basically saying we're not doing anything. So this is sort of no selected guest, no selected slot. We go through and mute all of the guests. So we know there are 6 guests. So we just go and say, I want to mute all of those guest channels. In here, like in anything that actually starts to work with the channels, you could put different logic. So say you wanted to mute them, but also sort of instead of muting them, take them out of master and put them into sort of another, subgroup, submix in vMix, or like with live to air, where if you could turn around and say, I want to turn them off air, which is sort of move them into a separate audio and video feed. So you could do all different things here, but the goal is basically you're just turning them off individually as guests, whether that's just muting, changing audio routes, or moving them into on air and off air with live to air, something like that. We then basically go and clear out all the layers in our live show. So the 4 layers that have the guest slots, we just turn them all to our open seat image. And then all we're doing is we're just making sure that all the layers in the green room, so we're going through the 6 connections that we have potentially, and we're just setting the layer for each of those. So we're sitting around saying, okay, just assign all these guests back to the green room. So that's all we really have to do here. At the end, we just say we assign all the guest assignments to 0. There's no guest in any of the slots. So that's really it. We just are going through this, getting everybody back into the green room, clearing out everybody that's live, and setting everything to say no selected channel, no selected slot, and no guests are assigned to any of the slots. So that's basically all we're doing for sort of all off air. And the last one is the ability to turn off a specific slot. And very similar to the all off air, except we're doing it for just one single slot. We are going into this and we're saying, okay, let's turn around. And again, this is the thing we said, it's the edge case, but if this guest is in a second slot and you're just dropping them from one slot, that may be something where you turn around and say, okay, I'm not putting them back to the green room, not doing any of that. And this is the exact same logic here. We're just going here and saying, if they're in more than one slot, we want to make note of that so that if I have to go and push them back to the green room, I make sure that they're not all still in another slot there. That's what we're doing here. So we record the channel that's leaving. So what guest is in the channel we set to go off air. So that's what we're recording here. And then again, if they're not in another channel. We just take and we turn their audio off, and we set the layer in the green room with their layer in the green room with their video back again. So they're sort of moved back to the green room. And then we set the layer for the live show input, whichever slot they were in. We set that back to the blank input as an open chair. And that is it. So again, a very simple format for doing this. And hopefully, because we're using it on repeated use cases, this model of sort of using dynamic values as arguments, and ways to pass an action into a script that's always running in the background. Hopefully that's becoming sort of more comfortable and more familiar to everybody. And that's really, I think, a great foundation for some of the stuff you may want to do in scripting. Just put little logical blocks and put this together as a loop in the background and just say, which logical block of code do I want to run? So that's really everything we wanted to cover here. Let me do a very quick look to see if there's anybody else in the comments. So I think we just have Michael joined us. So Michael, always good to see you here. No worries with the late login. We keep a light on for you. As long as we're live, we'll be here. And always great to have you join us. So thank you. So with that, why don't we wrap up the main show here, and we'll jump into our post show, and we can go over any other questions. I'll give you a little background for what we were doing here initially, and then we can sort of open it up and talk about any other things, any other questions everyone has. So we should be here next Friday as well, and we'll definitely see you then if you can't join us in the post show. If you can join us in the post show, we'll see you in a minute. Take care, everyone. All right, welcome back, everybody. I always enjoy the post show. It gives us a chance to sort of talk more casually about some of these things. So Michael has a question here. He says, how would you model more than 8 guests in vMix via 2 vMix machines sharing the audio via virtual cables? I'll start with the shameless plug for Live to Air, because we support up to 12 guests. But using vMix here, using 2 machines would be the only real way to do that. You don't have the ability to sort of extend that to more than 8 guests in a single instance. So that would be the best way to handle that. The virtual audio cables, you could do that as basically between different applications in the machine. You could also just do it over something like NDI, where you could move those outputs, those vMix guests, into a secondary machine, and then you'd have to route the audio back and forth to make sure the audio from the first 8 guests was being heard by the remaining 4 guests, or however you wanted to do with an additional vMix system. And that means you got to be able to create the 2 mix minuses. So you'd have sort of the studio audio plus the 8 guests from one machine being fed back to the second machine, so they would hear that and see whatever video you wanted them to see. And then vice versa, you'd need to take the 4 guests or whatever it is from that second machine and create a new mix, because right now the mix that would be going back to the guest inside something using vMix call would be generated inside of vMix, which would basically let you take one input and it does the mixes for all of those guests together. So in that mix, in that input you send back, that would have to be a submix that actually took in the audio from that second machine as well as whatever studio audio you wanted, and fed that back. So that would be how you would handle that, using multiple machines, which is, the probably the best way in this framework to do that. Okay. So let's see. Michael also had something. Let's see. No. Oh, okay. He said that's short, but not too short. Sharing specific. Yeah. What we wanted to do with this is I wanted to make sure that we stayed on topic, and I know that some of our shows have gotten fairly long, and maybe there was a bit of a drift because we covered a lot of different things. So I'm trying to be more focused with these shows. So I appreciate you noticing, because that's something we do work on. Every show is different, so some of them just require more time. But hopefully, this is something that people find more useful. Based on sort of what we're trying to accomplish here with the show. So, and now he says, so Michael is saying, and all that set up with 2 vMix would be easy to handle in your studio solution instead. So the one advantage, and I've talked with the folks at vMix. So what we bring that's sort of unique from vMix Call is that we have a whole workflow where guests can all call in against one URL. It's not individual links, and that URL can stay up, and you can have new guests join and other guests leave, but they all connect to a single URL. And the fact we have 12 guests on a single machine gives you a little more flexibility for how you want to handle that. So for something like this, you could, in theory, have all 12 people be in a green room, and then you could have a host pick which 4 or 5 they wanted to have sit in the seats and sort of move that around and then swap people in and out. And because we also have things like hand raises and other stuff that's all available programmatically, you could do things where you could look at, well, who has something to say and wants to get in and take a seat, and you could use that for doing things that are more interactive. So that's something we'll probably do at a future show, which will be more live to air specific. But at the end of the day, you're still using 2 machines. You still have sort of audio and video feeds moving between them. So there's a lot of similarity. I think the biggest difference is really in the workflow that live to air provides to be more open for guests just calling in. You can have anybody in your audience that's sort of watching you stream just click on a link like we do here, where anybody wants to join the show, they can just click on that link and you can see them, pick them up, and bring them on air. So that's probably the difference, because in vMix you do have to assign a unique URL for each person that you want to have join, and you have to send that to them. And if 2 people use the same link, they can sort of interfere with each other, and that can make the workflow a little more cumbersome. So Vita DeBrook says you can output every call as NDI on the second machine. Yes, so that's what I was referring to when I said you could use NDI as well. You can take each one of those callers out and say, I want to send them out as NDI, so they can come into that second machine as a sort of unique input with its own audio. What you will have to handle, though, is the audio mixes between those machines, because you will need the guest audio from that first system to be mixed and sent over to the second system, and vice versa. Same way you're sending those guests to that first system, that audio will sort of be in there, but you have to create a mix for that, because the mix minus vMix creates is just for those local call-in guests. The NDI sources would have to become part of the studio feed. So you'd have to create a mix with whatever's in your studio, those guests on a secondary machine, and feed that in as the return audio that vMix will then create the mix minus around for those guests coming into a vMix call. So Eric is saying he has to run, but I just wanted to. Okay, Eric, I thank you for taking the time to join us here, and hopefully what we did will work out for what you want to do. So this is probably a good point to jump in here. Eric Goodman was the person who contacted us. He was having a trial of live to air, and he wanted to do certain things for a game show he was setting up. where he wanted to work with people, bringing them on and off air and sort of making that setup work. So we did some work with him, and gave him a basic script that sort of modeled what we did here off of, and that would let him handle these guests coming in. And so that was the motivation sort of behind doing this as a show. Once we started to do that with Eric, that was something we thought could be more generally interesting. And the other thing is that I've had many people come to me and talk about how they miss BlaB. Now, BlaB was this service. I think they shut their doors in 2017, I think, something like that. So it's probably 5 or 6 years ago. And what they would let you do was you could actually take and start a BlaB session that would stream out. So you could have people just watch the stream. People could also say, I'd like to sort of wait and watch, but I may want to join and take an open seat inside of this BlaB session. So you could have, multiple people that were watching just take seats, join in the discussion, and the host would be able to, push people out and make room for new people to come in, things like that. But it was just sort of an open discussion. And by having it like sort of open seats that you could move people from the viewing audience into, it created sort of a dynamic around just different perspectives and made for an interesting conversation that could take place. So because a lot of people like that, I sort of structured this around that general concept. We could have people that are sort of watching, and then people that are in the hot seats that are actually part of the conversation. And you had the ability to swap people in and out. And that was really the goal. But it came from, what we did for Eric and his game show that he's working on. So hopefully when Eric has it up, we'll be able to share, he'll be able to share that with us, and we can take a look at what he's done. So Bill is asking, he says, do you know of any wireless mics that also have a feedback channel to feed audio to the earpiece of the talent? I actually don't. So, I mean, I'll start with that, straight up. What I know a lot of people do is they use cell phones for that sort of loop back to people, which gives you sort of a near real-time audio feed that somebody could have in their ear. So that's one mechanism that you can do that with. But there are, other types of wireless audio devices. So you wouldn't necessarily have to have it for as part of the mic system. That could be something that, you could just use as a separate wireless link, if you're in the same location. If not, you're probably doing something over a PC, so there may be something you could do out of that. But, and I apologize that I'm not that familiar with the Saramonic. I know their gear, but I just am not that familiar with all of their equipment. So I can take a look at that at some point if this is something you're interested in with something specific. But there are multiple ways to tackle that wireless thing, and especially with something like, your wireless AirPods or something like that, and your phone, that just makes an easy way to do that. You can set up a conference call and have multiple people all listening to the same thing and just have them all on mute. So the only audio coming in is what comes in through their mic. Okay. Do we have anything else here? So what Michael is saying is, wouldn't that swarm the network? So yes and no. So if you, inside of vMix call, that all transmits locally. So there isn't an NDI for that sort of initial 8. So the only NDI feeds would be what you'd have on that second machine, where those NDI feeds would be coming in. In general, if you are going to be using, if you have a machine that will be taking in more than 6 1080 NDIs, you need at least a 2.5 gig network, and probably a 10 gig network to just make sure to have sufficient bandwidth. The good news is, though, that 2.5 gig NICs are very inexpensive. So in relative terms, it's like under $40, probably under $30 for some of them. And the switches are not as expensive as the full 10 gig switches. So, you may be able to do something for, a few $100s for a switch versus sort of $600 or $800 for a full 10 gig switch. So I'm not saying they're cheap, but there are ways to do that. And if you're going to do something that is seriously dependent on NDI, I really recommend at least a 2.5 gig network, but probably a 10 gig network in your studio for that. Oh, the other thing, just as a point, you can do things that are peer-to-peer as well. So if you wanted to just sort of connect two systems together, because I was sending a lot from one system to another, you could do that. But that does make your network more complex and could introduce other issues where you can avoid the switch, but now you have two IP addresses on that box. And it may not be the easiest thing to set up and manage and get working correctly. But another possibility, if you wanted to save money and you just had two machines that needed to talk at a higher bandwidth than your regular sort of 1 gig traditional network. So yeah, I mean, Vita the broadcast is mentioning that the NDIs are not full NDIs at all. So at 720p 30, you can 30 megabits per second is probably, I mean, I'm not sure because we haven't really looked at it, but that's probably a little on the low side as a, to sort of make sure you have enough space. So as a rule, I would sort of say, leave 50 megabits for 720, P30, leave 100 megabits for 1080p 30, and leave 140 for 1080p 60, sort of just as a general. That's kind of how I would size things, so you can deal with variability. But it's very possible it's lower, so you can fit this in. And 720 does make a big difference. So I believe all the vMix calls coming out are 720p. They're not 1080. So that does certainly reduce some of the bandwidth needed for that. But it isn't something I've looked at. So Vita, thank you for sharing that. That is definitely useful. Okay. So that's pretty much everything. If anybody here has any other questions, happy to dive into it here. But I think what I'm trying to focus on now is sort of building out what we've done in our current scripting model, where we have this sort of loop with a case switch statement in there, switch case statement. And so let me know if that's like a useful model, or if you're looking to do other things, because that would be really helpful for us, knowing what shows would have the most value to everybody here, because that's really our goal, is to really take care of what everybody in the community is looking to do. So we do have all of this up on a link so you could download. That's already up there now. So we're trying to be better about getting that up in the beginning of the shows as well. So if you want to take and download it and play with it, we have all of the every image, all the video that we did for this one. We just took the preview images that you get. So this is from Video Blocks, where we have a subscription to that, but we just put all of their watermarked images in here. So we make sure we respect their copyrights and all of this. But definitely something to keep in mind. You can use this as is with no worries. So Bill's asking, what are the pricing options on live to air? So there's three options. So our top end, which is 12 channel, that's a $1,500 US software that then needs corresponding hardware to run that on. So you're probably talking like a 16 core 32 gig system to run that on with. We use an RTX A4000. When we sell that as a unit, that's what we sell that with. But that's something you can just build your own hardware if you want and be good there. We have a 6-channel one, which runs at $800 US, and that fits in the sort of an 8-core, much more of a mainstream type of hardware footprint. A 6-core, 16 gigabyte memory with a A2000. And again, the A2000 sort of moved from the $1,000 to the, $400 or lower camp. So that sort of a more idealized spot, in considering hardware. But the thing about all this is that if you run things like I want to put everybody to 720p or I only want to use 8, you can run it on lower end hardware. I'm just sort of saying these would be the hardware specs we give to people who want to use it full out with all the features. And lastly, we have something called Call-in-One, which is a single channel that has all of the call-in features. You can queue up guests, but you can only feed one out as an NDI feed into your production. And that's only available as a subscription for $99 a year. But it sort of has all the workflow elements, just a single output. And that's another option. Anybody who buys Live Tier 6 or Live Tier 12 gets Call-in-One sort of bundled free. So you get an extra channel and an extra way to use that. So you could use your live to air for your guest and Call-in-One for your audience to call in and bring them on one at a time to ask questions or do something there. So that's sort of the pricing model we use for that. So, and the other thing about Call-in-One is that it does work on Mac. So we know we've had a lot of people ask about the Mac piece of this. So that's the first solution we have that works on Mac. It needs an Apple Silicon-based Mac, so it's sort of M1 up, but it does work on Mac and it doesn't have to be a very high-end Mac. It has a lot of options, to sort of work even on lower-end hardware for that. So, thank you. And Annelies and John, thank you for joining us here. I definitely appreciate it. And thanks for hanging out for the after show. It's always great to have people in the after show. So thank you for hanging around for that. We appreciate it. So let's see. Can you book smaller sessions of Neural online? So Michael, if you're asking, if you'd like to get a demo of what we do have demos. If you go on to our sort of neuralnet.com, there is book a demo. We do lots of one-on-one demos with people, so be happy to go through and show you everything we have in there. And that goes for anybody that is interested. You don't have to wait for us to do a show on it. We're happy to do a live demo for you. So just neuralnet.com, and I forget ./demo or something, but it's just on the site. We'll say schedule a demo, and we'll get you on the calendar and show you what we do. So thanks for asking about that, Michael. So, and see. So let's say Vita the Broadcast is saying you can use AI to generate free stuff today, even with a little movement. So yeah, there's a lot of stuff that AI is going to let us do. To a certain extent, I mean, we've used sort of video blocks, story blocks, I think is sort of their blanket name for all of the different images, video. We've used them for years and years and years, and I think they are a great value for money. So using these in here, they don't sponsor us, they don't give us anything, but I just I definitely, if you're looking for a solution for that, as Vita the Broadcast says, there are lots of great tools in the AI realm to do this. But I also, I just like story blocks, and it's something we've used and we've been very happy with. So, any of the above are definitely, good options for generating stuff that can be useful for, things you want to embed in your productions. So let's see. You have anybody else? Game Master from my RPG table is using a lot, and the results are insane. Yeah, I mean, I think some of the things that you can do with AI in generating imagery, and even I know more video. I haven't seen as much that I consider for general production use, but some of the things you can generate with imagery is phenomenal and can be very, very specific. So yeah, where that could be great is like if you wanted to create a great backdrop to put different elements in, sort of your background that you're going to paint on top of for all different production elements, scores and other things. I think there's amazing stuff that can be generated out of AI, and it really is fairly eye-catching. The thing to keep in mind is that you have to be comfortable with people feeling that that is something that was generated with AI, because a lot of people, can sort of, you can see these things. There are telltale signs. So if that is not a concern for you, some of the imagery really is very compelling, and so it draws your eye to it. So I know people use it for thumbnails on their YouTube and Facebook videos, and I know people use it for other types of visual elements they want to incorporate into their production. So definitely very cool. So we have Red Carpet Media Marketing Group. So sorry, little long name for our top bar there, but I'm glad you enjoyed the show, Red Carpet. That's something we really appreciate. So great to have you here. All right, so I think we are probably at a good wrap up point. So thank you everybody for taking the time to watch the show and to hang out here in the post show. Always appreciate it, and we will be back next week with another show. So till then, be safe, be well, and we'll see you next Friday.